Hello everyone, my name is Tanner Davis. I'm with the account management team here at Newdon Technologies, and today we're going to cover some of the more advanced features of Microsoft Report Builder. Before getting started, I would strongly recommend watching our Intro to Report Builder webinar, as it covers some of the more basic features, and as most of what we're going to be doing today involves building upon and adding new features to the report that we created during that session. Now, as you can see, I already have that report open, but for most of you, you probably won't just have it sitting here, so let's go over how to open a report that's been saved to the report server. My first step is going to just be clicking this little circle here in the top left, and then going to choose Open. And if you've been working in Report Builder recently, you should be able to click on this Recent Sites and Server button here. It will then give you the name of your report server, which we can open. If you remember from last time, we're using the GermZone 510 instance, but here you'd be picking whatever instance you were writing the report against. We're then going to choose System and Training, because that's where we saved our report last time. I'm going to click on my report and choose Open. And now we're ready to rock and roll. Now there are three sort of major terms that we're going to be covering as we continue to make additions to this report today. The first of those, and probably the most prominent, is expressions. These are most commonly used to change what or how data is displayed based on specific criteria. But today we're actually going to be using them to first calculate the number of cases that are listed out in our report, and second, add the ability to hyperlink directly to a JustWare case simply by clicking on the case title in our report. The second major term would be parameters. These are user-defined filters. Today we'll be adding two parameters to our report to allow the user to specify a date range for which cases were received in JustWare. The final sort of major term that we'll be covering today is relationships. Now these are, as you would imagine, relationships that are established between two JustWare views based on specific criteria, which then allow us to pull fields from either one into our report. Today we'll be establishing a relationship between the JW50 case view and the JW50 case involved person view in order to pull in case involved person information that is pertinent to each case listed out in JustWare. Now, enough exposition, let's get started actually making some changes. The first thing we're going to do is, as I mentioned before, add a count of the number of cases that are listed in our report. To do this, we're going to first add a new row by clicking anywhere here in our table, which gives us these little gray boxes along the columns and rows. We're then going to right-click here in our details row, which, if you remember from before, is the row with these three horizontal lines. Then going to choose Insert Row and Outside Group below. Now, as you notice, the row that we just created is still enclosed in this case type description group parenthesis, meaning that it's going to be repeated for each unique value in that case type group. Because it's going to be repeated for each unique case type, this will serve as a subtotal row as opposed to an actual total. So here in this first text box, we're going to go ahead and just type subtotal. We're then going to click on our second text box here, right click, and choose expression from the drop down list. Now, as you can see, there are quite a few different options here in the categories section. There's really only one that we're going to concern ourselves with today, but I'll go ahead and click through each one of these and give you kind of a brief explanation of what they are. With the exception of constants, because as you can see, we don't have any, and generally we don't really use those when building JustWare reports anyway. Built-in fields are fields that are in no way dependent on the data that's being pulled in through your query. As you can see, this includes things like execution time, page numbers, the name of the report, the name of the folder that the report is, and things like that. Parameters, this is going to list out any parameters that you have in your report. Currently we don't have any. This will change once we add in those date parameters that we mentioned earlier. And this will then allow you to reference those and pull in the data that's entered into those parameters. The fields category lists out all the fields that belong to the data set that your table that you're using is currently associated with, which in our case is data set 1, as that's the only data set that we have. And then as you can see over here in the values section, we have each of the fields that we pulled in our last webinar using the Query Design Wizard. The datasets category allows you to select between multiple datasets, should you have them in your report, and pull in field values from each one of those. The variables section is where you can pull in user-defined values, which are defined in your group properties, and then calculated once per unique group value, which can then obviously be referenced here in expressions. We won't be touching on this today, but it's there if you want it. We'll now jump down to our operators group. The first thing there being arithmetic. These are, as you can see, just basic mathematic operators. Comparison allows you to, as you would imagine, compare data. Concatenation, again, this is pretty self-explanatory. It allows you to combine two strings as well as do simple addition. Logical bitwise, which just sort of allows you to do some basic logic. One thing I failed to mention before, if you notice, as I click on each one of these, over here on the right-hand side, we have a little description box, which, as you can see, is giving you a brief description of the different options that we click on. And then they also give you a very nice example of how the syntax should look when creating an expression like this. And bit shift. Now, the way that bit shift works, and I hope that I'm not telling you the wrong thing, I guess if I am, I'll just come back and edit this, is these double left arrows multiply a number by 2 raised to the power of x. X in this case being whatever number you put here. In this example, they've got the number 4. So what this is saying is field's integer counter dot value, which is a field that they're pulling from their query, which is going to be some number, is being multiplied by the number 2 raised to the 4th power. And with these right arrows, it's the same thing, except instead of multiplying by 2 raised to 4, we'd be dividing this number by 2 raised to the 4, I think. Next, we jump down to our common functions group. The first there is text. These are extremely intricate ways to format your text. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but as you can see, you have quite a range of options there. Date and time. This is, again, a multitude of options for formatting dates and times within your report. I guess it's important to note that a lot of this formatting can be done via the ribbon or text box properties, which we'll touch on a little bit more later. But anyway, you have the option to do that in expression here as well. Math. These are just different math functions. I'm sure all the math nerds out there are getting pretty excited at this point. I personally don't know what most of these mean. But anyway, inspection. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's used to inspect a specific field and return a true or false value based on whether or not it is something. So if the field is in fact a date, it will return a true value. Otherwise, it will return a false value. Same goes for is array, is nothing, and is numeric. Program flow. There are a few different options here. Choose, as the description says, allows you to select and return a value from a list of arguments. In this first example here, choose, they have 2 followed by a list of numbers. What that is saying is that it wants the second number from the list of numbers there. So in that case, we'd be returning a 15 there. If, for those of you that are familiar with JDA, you probably recognize this. This is functions very similarly to how an if statement works in JDA. And it allows you to specify how something should look or what should appear based on whether or not a certain criteria is met, and also what to do if that criteria is not met. And switch is essentially just an if statement with more options. Next, in our aggregate group, we have a bunch of different options and different ways to aggregate data. Next, in our financial section, you have a bunch of different options here. If you know what any of these things mean, then you are much smarter than I am, because I have no clue. But as you can see, again, you have descriptions of each one of these, as well as examples for how to properly create that syntax. Conversion's pretty self-explanatory. It allows you to convert one type of field into another. A few examples: convert something to a Boolean format, convert something to a date format, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, miscellaneous. I'm just going to touch on a couple of these, some of the more commonly used ones. In scope, determines whether or not something is within the scope of a certain report object, meaning whether or not something is within a table, within the group, within the specified data set, etc., and then returns a true or false value based on that. And then row number, this just gives you a count of all the rows within a specified object, meaning all the rows within a data set, within a table, and so on. Now, I know that was sort of a fast and dirty run through of each of the different categories and options here in expressions, but I do encourage you, when you have the chance, to come in here and click through each one of these, take a look at the description and examples, and try them out for yourselves so you get kind of a better understanding of all the possibilities that expressions bring to a report. But for now, let's get back to the task at hand, which was, of course, creating an expression that's going to count out the number of cases that are listed in our report. To do that, we're going to come here to our common functions group, which we already have open. We're then going to jump back to this aggregate section here, and we're going to be using count distinct. Now, I choose count distinct as opposed to regular count because it ensures that a unique value is never going to be counted more than once. For something as simple as this report that we're doing, that wouldn't really be a problem, but as you continue to build more complex reports, it's entirely possible that values will be repeated within your query, and as such could cause some duplicate data coming back. So in order to just subvert that possibility entirely, I just like to always use count distinct. To bring that in, I'm just going to go ahead and double click. As you can see, that pulled that into my expression with the open parenthesis as well, so I don't have to worry about that. Next, we need to tell it what it is that we're actually counting. So to do that, we're going to come back to our fields category here. And we're going to choose case ID from our list of values. Now, I'm choosing case ID because when doing something like a count, it's important to use a unique value in order to ensure accurate data. I know that case IDs are unique values and that there's only ever going to be one per case in Justware, so that's a pretty safe bet. To finish this off, I'm going to add a closing parenthesis and then click OK. Now, if we run our report, as you can see, for each of these case type groups, we now have a subtotal that gives us the number of cases associated with each of those case types. Next, we're going to do the exact same thing in another row, but this time we're going to be doing it for the total of the entire report as opposed to just a subtotal. To do this, we're going to add another row, just like we did before, by right-clicking, this time on the row that we added last time as opposed to the details group. Then going to be choosing insert row again, and outside group below. As you'll notice, this row that we created this time is not included in that case type group, and as such will not be repeated, but will only appear once and will reflect the number of cases in the entire report as opposed to just within those groups. So in our text box here, I'm going to go ahead and type total. And then to make things easier on ourselves, As opposed to recreating the expression that we just made, I'm going to come up here, right-click on this text box that has our expression, choose Copy, then right-click on this text box down here, and choose Paste. Now if we run our report, we can see that in addition to the subtotals for each group, we also have a total row here at the bottom that gives us the total number of cases listed out in this report. Now, just to make that totals row look just a little more distinguishable, we're going to make a few changes using the ribbon up here. To do that, I'm just going to go ahead, click in this first text box here, and drag all the way across so that I have all three text boxes highlighted here in this row. Alternatively, I can click somewhere here in this table and click on the gray box outside the row to select all those text boxes. Next, let's give this sort of a darker background color. I'm going to go ahead and choose this dark blue here. If you'll notice, I did that under the border section of the ribbon. Don't ask me why that's in the border section, because that has nothing to do with borders, but that's where it is. And then next we'll change the font color so that we can actually see it. To do that, while I've still got these text boxes highlighted, I'm just going to come up here to the font section, click on this little A with the color underneath it, and choose white from that drop down. And to make it stand out a little more, we're also going to go ahead and bold that. Now when I run my report, the total row is nice and obvious down there at the bottom, kind of stands out. Now let's create some parameters for this report so that we can filter it down based on the dates that the cases were received in JustWare. To do that, I'm going to come over here to our datasets folder, click that plus button there, right-click on dataset 1, and choose Query. If you remember from last time, in order to add filters, we just come down here to the Applied Filters section and click that little funnel or martini glass looking button. In this case, we're going to add 2. Under field name, we're going to choose case receive date. And then in our operators, this is where these two filters are going to differentiate. For our first one, our first parameter, we're going to want to use the is more than or equal to operator. What this is saying basically is that we only want to see cases that were added to JustWare on or after this specific date. We're going to leave the value at none because, again, we want the user to be putting in this information, and we're going to check that parameter box. Now I'll come down to my second case received date filter, and under operator I'll choose is less than or equal to, meaning that we only want to see cases that were received on or before this date. Again, we leave value at none, and we click that parameter box. Our filters now state that we only want to see cases that were entered into JustWare on or after our first date and on or before our end date. Then click OK. And as you can see, that parameters folder now has the ability to expand with that little plus button. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that now. And there are our 2 case receive date parameters. Now if we run our report, before anything, you'll notice we have to put in these 2 dates. So let's go ahead and do that now. And when we run this now, I would expect to see less cases, and I do, because now we're filtering it down to only the cases that were received in JustWare between July 1st and October 13th. Now, while a list of active cases in JustWare is somewhat useful, having to then go and type in a case name or number into JustWare just to bring up the case is kind of a pain. So let's alleviate that by adding the option to link directly to a case from our report. To do that, I'm going to come up here to our case title text box, right click on that, and then choose text box properties. There's a properties window for each object in Report Builder, and for the most part they're very similar. These give you further control over the contents of the object and provide a little more context as to what it is you're changing. They also allow you to write expressions for determining how information is displayed. As you can see, there are a few different options here over on the left hand side, so I'm just going to click through each one of these and kind of give you an idea of what it is they allow you to do. Under General, the first option here is Name, which is simply the name of the object that you have highlighted. In this case, it's the case title text box, and as such, it's just called case title. The Value section allows you to specify the value that is displayed. In this case, we're just choosing a field from our list of fields that we created in our query. As you'll notice, this section, as well as the tooltip section, has this little FX button next to it. That means that you can use an expression to determine how that's displayed. As you can see, when I click that, the expression window pops up, and we have all those same options that we saw before. The tooltip section allows you to create a tooltip that will pop up when you hover your mouse over the report object. In this case, we can type test, and we'll see how that plays out in just a little bit. As for sizing options, by default, allow height to increase is checked, meaning that as the contents of the text box change, the height will change to accommodate those. Allow height to decrease is unchecked. Checking that would allow the height of the text box to dynamically change, again, based on the contents of the cell. Next is number. As you can see, there are just different options here for formatting numbers into different number types. This allows you to change the number of decimal places that will be shown, determine whether or not there should be a comma between thousands, change how values are displayed, how zeros should look, and so on and so forth. It also has a multitude of options for date formats, which are much easier to use than actually writing an expression for that date format. I highly encourage you to use this. And then we also have things like time formats, percentage formatting, scientific, and even your own custom formats. Next, under alignment, this is pretty straightforward. You can control the horizontal and vertical alignments for the text box, as well as add in padding, which is something we'll be doing a little bit later. Under font, you're given the option to change the actual font, change the size of the font, change the font color, add in styles, change your line spacing, and so on and so forth. It also gives you a little example of how your text will look. And as you'll notice, again, a lot of these options are or can be determined by expressions. And we know that because of this little FX box that's next to them. Next, under border, here you can adjust the border on this specific text box. You could also do this for the entire table by selecting the entire table first and then coming to this properties window. Under fill, this is where you can change the background color of the object that you have selected. You can also choose to use an image as your background as opposed to just a plain color. Again, as you'll notice, these are changeable with expressions. Under visibility, we have the option to determine how and whether or not this object is displayed when the report is initially run. And this is also something that we're going to touch on just a little bit later in our report, so I'll leave this be for now. Interactive sorting is pretty self-explanatory. It gives you the option to create one of those little buttons at the top of a column that allows you to sort based on whatever value you choose. And finally, we have the actions section, which allows us to link a report object to something else, such as another report or, in this case, a URL. In order to build out the URL that will tell the report where to go to find the just where case, we're going to click on this expression button to open up our expression window. And then we're going to type out this exact expression. And feel free to write this down, save it somewhere. This is always going to stay the same, and this is the expression that is always used to link something to a case in JustWhere. So we're going to type double quotes in the word open, followed by a colon and the word case, followed by another colon, double quotes again. We then put in an ampersand. We're then going to come down to our fields category, and choose that case ID field there. And then we're going to click OK and choose OK again. Now if we run this report, put in our date. As you can see, when I expand on this and hover over each one of these cases, I'm now given a little hand signifying that this does in fact go somewhere. You'll also notice that when I hover over these cases, that little tooltip that we created earlier pops up that says test. So this hand signifies that this is in fact linked to something and that clicking on it will take us somewhere. But it definitely doesn't look like a URL, and it's not readily obvious that this would be something that we could click on. So let's go ahead and change that now. So we're going to go ahead and come back to our case title text box. Again, we're going to be going to text box properties. This time we'll be working in the font tab. Here we'll change our color to blue. And under effects, we'll choose underline. Click OK again. Run our report. Choose our date range. And now these case titles look like what you would expect a URL or a link to look like. Now it's time to add in some case-involved person information to our report. In order to do that, again, I'm going to come over here to our dataset 1. I'm going to right-click and choose Query. Next, I'm going to find the JW50 case-inv pers view. Now, if you remember from last time, it's important to always use JW50 views when building reports for Justware. Once I find my case-inv pers view, I'm then going to click that little plus to expand and look at the fields. And I'm going to choose the fields that I want to see. In this case, we're going to be using case-inv pers first name, case-inv pers last name, involved type description, and involved type master code. Once we have those there, we're going to come over to the relationships section. Click on this little double down arrow here to expand on that. And then click on that auto detect button to turn off the auto detect relationships. Once we've done that, we're going to click on the add relationship button over here. For our left table, we want to choose the table that we originally started with, which in our case was JW50 case. And in the right, we're choosing the table that we're joining to that, which is, in this case, JW50 case-inv pers. As you notice, when I click in here, the JW50 case and JW50 case-inv pers tables are already there as an option in our dropdown because we're pulling fields from both of those already. And then going to double click here under Join Fields, choose the Add Field button. For my left join field, meaning the JW50 case table, I'm going to be choosing Case ID. From the right join field, meaning the JW50 case-inv pers table, I'll also be choosing Case ID. This says that we're establishing our connection based on the fact that the Case ID from JW50 case is equal to the Case ID in JW50 case-inv pers. This ensures that we're only going to see case-involved person information that is associated with the cases that they're actually involved on. Once that's done, we can go ahead and click OK. And now if we expand on our dataset 1, you'll notice we now have case-involved person information as well as our case information that we had originally. Next, we need to add a new row and group so that we can display the case-involved person information. To do that, I'm first going to come down here to our row group section, click the downward arrow on the details group, choose add group and parent group. Now our goal here is to recreate our details row as a parent row and make the case-involved person information our new details row. To do that, we're going to group by case ID here. And we're going to make sure and check this add group header box so that when we do create our new group, we have a row specifically associated with that one. Go ahead and click OK. Now that previous step created a new empty row between case type description and details, as you can see. It also created a new column which we don't want. So if we come up here to this gray box above this column and right click, we can then choose delete column, and that is now gone. Next, as I mentioned, we're recreating our current details row. So we're going to click here in the details row on this case title text box, drag to the case received date text box, right click and choose copy. I'm going to highlight the two text boxes directly above those, right click again and choose paste. We now have the information that we had in our details row in the newly created parent group, and we can change our details row to be case involved person information. To do that, I'm going to come to our original case titles text box and click this little box that appears when we hover over it. This gives me a list of available fields. From that, I'm going to choose case involved person first name. I'm then going to come to our original case received date text box again, click this little box here, and choose involved type description. Now that we have our case involved person information here in the table, we need to make it so that this case involved person name hyperlinks to their actual name record in JustWare. In order to do that, if you remember from before, we're just going to right click on that text box, choose text box properties again, come down to the action section, and as you can see, there's already a go to URL button checked with an expression in there. That's because this was originally the case title box, and as such, has the case title expression for linking to a case in JustWare. What we're going to do is just highlight everything up to the open colon, delete that out, and type in name-specific information here, which will be the word name followed by a colon and double quotes, an ampersand. And as we can see, we don't have a name ID field here, which is what we'd like to hyperlink to, or what we need to hyperlink to in order to jump to that name record in JustWare. So let's go ahead and add that now. Go ahead and cancel out of this. Come back over here to our data set, choose query, and right here under case in pers, we're going to find case in pers name ID, check that little box, we're bringing that field in, click OK. Now we can come back here to our text box properties, back to action, open up that expression. Again, we're going to remove everything up to the colon after the open, replace what was once case with name, add another colon, double quotes, an ampersand again. We'll then come to our fields, choose case in pers name ID, and this time we're going to add .toString to the end of that. Now, again, feel free to go ahead and copy this down, save this somewhere, because this expression is always the same for linking to a name record in JustWare. Once that's done, we'll go ahead and click OK, and click OK again. Now, in order to distinguish the case involved person from the case title, we're going to add a little bit of padding to this so that it's indented. To do that, we have a couple different choices, I guess, to choose from in order to add padding. As we saw when we were looking through text box properties before, we have the option to do that there, right here under the alignment section. If you'll notice, we also have the option over here in our properties pane to adjust padding right there. For those of you that don't remember or don't still have this checked from last time, in order to have this properties panel displayed, you simply have to come up to this view tab and make sure that that properties checkbox is checked. This time around, we're going to go ahead and use that to add in our padding for this text box. So I've opened up the padding section. I'm then going to come to left and change that to 10, to a 10 and hit enter. Now, as you can see, the case involved person first name is indented just a little bit so that it's easily distinguishable from the actual case title. Next, we want to add in the case involved person last name as well, because having just the first name isn't super useful. So I'm going to come back to this case involved person first name text box, right click and choose text box properties. Then going to, in the value section, click on that expression button. And we're going to concatenate this in a way similar to what we did when we created our URL link expression. And that is using ampersands. We'll put in an ampersand there. We'll then add in double quotes, a space, and double quotes again. We can then come to our fields down here and pull in case impers last name. Click OK. Click OK again. As you notice, now that we've changed that to be a concatenation of two fields as opposed to just one single field, that display text there has changed to an expression tag, signifying that it is no longer just a simple field, but there's some sort of work going on there in order to generate whatever it is that's going to be shown. Now, if we run that report, we get an error. And it looks like it has to do with that case involved person text box. So we're going to come back in here and see what we did wrong. Then open up that values expression. And this is an easy mistake to make when making concatenations. If you'll notice, I put an ampersand after the first field. I then added in my space and neglected to put in another ampersand, which is required in order to concatenate something like a space to, again, another field. So I've added in that new ampersand. Let's click OK again. OK again. Run it this time. Now we're not getting an error. Let's put in our date range. View that report. Now, as you can see, when we expand on that, the case involved person names are listed out there. They are clickable links. They are also indented so we can distinguish them from the case title. Now, one thing you may also have noticed is that currently the case titles are being displayed even though the group isn't expanded. And that's not what we want. So let's go back and figure out what's causing that. Now, because we created a new group to house our old details row information, it's no longer respecting the visibility options that it was before. To change this, we're going to come down here to our row group section. Click the downward arrow on the case ID group, which is the new group we created in order to put our case information. Then choose Group Properties. And under Visibility, we're going to change this to hide when the report is initially run, similar to the way that the case involved person information is currently working. When we initially run the report, you do not see the case involved person information. You only see it after you expand on that group. In order to make this group function the same way, we're then going to click on this Display can be toggled by this report item checkbox. Click in this drop down and choose the case type description text box as our toggle option. We'll then click OK. And now when we run the report, after we put in our data again, as you can see, the only thing that's displayed are the case title and their equivalent subtotals. And then upon expanding, we're given the name of the case as well as the case involved people. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, we want this report to only show defendant information, and currently it's showing information for every person involved on the case. So let's go ahead and change that. To do that, again, we're going to be coming in over here to our dataset 1, right-clicking and choosing Query. We're now going to add a new filter based on involvement type master code, which will come from the JW50 case impers view. We'll be using the is operator once again, similarly to when we filtered on case status master code. And also similarly to that, we'll be using the value of 1, which signifies the primary involved person or defendant. Once that's done, we'll go ahead and click OK. We'll run our report again, put in our date range. And now, as you can see, when we expand on these cases, each one is now only showing the defendant and no other involved types. And now to finish things off, we're going to save our report and then view it in Justware. Because we were working with a report that already existed and we opened it from the report server, we no longer have to do a save as, but it can instead just come up to this little save button, click on that, and our report will be saved directly to the server. Any of the changes we made will show up immediately. Now we can come over here to Justware, navigate down to System Reports, open up that folder that we saved our report in, click on it, again put in our date, run the report, and there it is. And now if we click on either a case or name here in the report, we can see that hyperlinking in action. That's it for our look into some of the more advanced features of Report Builder. I hope that this was enlightening and emboldening, and that you all feel a little bit more confident now going into Report Builder and creating your own reports. If you have any questions pertaining to what we talked about today, please feel free to call in or email our support department, and they'll be happy to answer. Again, my name is Tanner Davis. I'm with the account management team here at Nudon, and I'll see you next time.